What's good? It's Woog. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. We have Caleb Plant, 21 wins and 1 loss, taking on Anthony Dirrell, 34 wins, 2 losses, and 2 draws. This is a battle between two former 168-pound champions. Caleb Plant held his belt for 3 title defenses against less than elite opponents, and Anthony Dirrell is actually a 2-time WBC 168-pound champion. And this fight is taking place on the Deontay Wilder versus Robert Helenius undercard. This is actually a really good undercard fight. But we've got, again, 2 former 168-pound champions, and the 168-pound division is interesting in what we will call not only the post-Andre Ward, Carl Froch era, but we'll take it a step further and say the post-James DeGale, Bout Jack era. And it's an interesting division because you basically had 4 different champions holding 4 different belts. So Caleb Plant beat Uzcategui. Uzcategui beat Anthony Dirrell's brother, Andre Dirrell. And by the way, when the Dirrell brothers were amateurs, Andre Dirrell was supposed to be the superstar of the family. Like, he was projected to have a greater professional career. But in fact, Anthony Dirrell has actually had a more accomplished and consistent career. But you had basically 4 champions at different times. Like, again, Anthony Dirrell had won the belt twice. First, after back-to-back fights with Saki Obika, and then he lost his title to Bout Jack. In fact, Bout Jack for a while was the only person to have beaten Anthony Dirrell, all the way up until Dirrell lost in September of 2019 against David Benavidez. That was on, I believe, the Errol Spence Jr. versus Sean Porter undercard. So Anthony Dirrell for a few years had only that 1 loss to prime Bout Jack, and that was in 2015. So if you fast forward, like, let's say 2 to 3 years, you basically had 4 champions. You had Callum Smith holding the WBA belt. You had David Benavidez twice. Now, you had Anthony Dirrell, then David Benavidez, then Anthony Dirrell, then David Benavidez again, kind of going back and forth with the WBC belt. And then again, you had Uzcategui and then Caleb Plant holding the IBF belt. And you had Gilberto Zurdo Ramirez and then Billy Joe Saunders holding the WBO belt. And Gilberto never lost the belt. Zurdo never lost it. He went up in weight. And then Billy Joe Saunders won the title like in a vacant bout. But you basically had this like standoff, and there was like no title unification. In fact, I don't recall there being a title unification attempt for years since James DeGale and Bout Jack attempted to unify the titles, and that one ended up being a draw. So you had basically each champion sitting on an island, holding and defending, sometimes vacating, sometimes losing the belt twice, either due to drug offenses or on the scale in the case of David Benavidez, but holding on to that 1 title. That was all until Canelo stormed the gates at 168, and he basically won 2 belts in 1 fight against Callum Smith, snatched those up because, again, it was a WBA belt, and then the vacant WBC belt was on the line in that fight, and then he beat Billy Joe Saunders after handling Avni Yildirim with ease. Canelo then took the WBO belt from Billy Joe Saunders, and then he's like, okay, I want to unify. Who's got the other belt? You, Caleb Plant. He went from Matchroom over to PBC to complete the undisputed title claim, and that was, again, against Caleb Plant, which makes it very interesting because if you listen to some of Caleb Plant's rhetoric, he's almost talking like somebody who is like this immensely accomplished champion. He's almost talking like he's here and Anthony Dirrell's here, when it is, in fact, Anthony Dirrell who has won the belt twice. And if you look at the level of opponents that each guy has beaten, Anthony Dirrell has had a objectively more impressive career. I know it's all subjective, but if you look at their track records, it would be hard to make the argument that Caleb Plant, fight over fight, had a more accomplished and a better resume than Anthony Dirrell. But Caleb Plant is talking sometimes as if he wasn't holding on to like a winning lotto ticket, basically, by having a belt at the right time when Canelo Alvarez came to the division and made it his mission to become, or to at least try to become, undisputed champion. Caleb Plant, his title defenses, which, look, skill-wise, I've always been pretty high on Caleb Plant. Even when he was fighting Rogelio Porky Medina back in early 2018. That was Caleb Plant's last fight before challenging Uzkadagai for Uzkadagai's title. Look, skill-wise, it's never been a question for me with Caleb Plant. But when you look at what he did after he earned the title, he had 3 title defenses. Again, he didn't try to fight against, David Benavidez or Gilberto Ramirez or Billy Joe Saunders, which, by the way, Benavidez was on PBC. At the same time, Caleb Plant was on PBC, and they both had a share of the title. And Caleb Plant instead was simply defending his belt against Mike Lee, Vincent Feigenbutz, and then a 40-year-old Caleb Truax. Those were Caleb Plant's 3 title defenses. And then, again, he's holding on to the winning lotto ticket, so he earns the Canelo sweepstakes, and then he loses the title in a entertaining, competitive fight where Canelo eventually stopped Caleb Plant via 11th round TKO. So I don't get where Caleb Plant, quite frankly, is getting this elevated sense of, elite accomplishment when he's talking about or to other fighters within the division. And then you've got Anthony Dirrell, cancer survivor, goes by the dog. And, I remember when he had those back-to-back fights against Sakio Bika after he stopped a pretty good fighter at one point, Anthony Hanshaw. Anthony Dirrell has those back-to-back very grueling fights. If you want to look at just, trench warfare, back-and-forth style fights where, Sakio Bika from Cameroon, that's the same country that Francis Ngannou, the MMA UFC heavyweight champion, is from. Sakio Bika is kind of a pressure, come-forward fighter who throws a lot of punches and is looking to collapse the pocket and throw hard. And Anthony Dirrell fought to a draw with Bika the first time, and then they ran it back. Actually on the Sean Porter versus Kell Brook undercard. And then Anthony Dirrell beats Sakio Bika via unanimous decision. And that is how he first secured the WBC 168-pound title. And then in his very next fight, he loses that title to Bout Jack. And then Anthony Dirrell goes on to win his next 6 fights, including like a knockout win. First round knockout win over Caleb Truax. Yeah, the same Caleb Truax, who was 40 years old by the time Caleb Plant fought him in January of 2021. He was 5 years younger, and this was around the time Caleb Truax upset James DeGale. Anthony Dirrell stopped Caleb Truax in the first round. And again, he goes on a 6-fight winning streak. He knocked out Avni Yildirim in the 10th round. Now, granted, Avni Yildirim isn't really seen to be an elite fighter, although he did fight Anthony Dirrell pretty evenly. And that fight actually was stopped due to a head clash, accidental head clash, which, Anthony Dirrell, 2 fights in a row, suffered devastating head clashes. He suffered one against Avni Yildirim in that fight where, again, it was a technical decision win, a split technical decision win for Anthony Dirrell in a very even fight against Yildirim. So he suffered a cut in that fight over his eye. And then against David Benavidez, suffered another nasty cut. But that one was at the hands of a left hook in a fight where it took place on the Errol Spence versus Sean Porter undercard. David Benavidez, pretty much to this day, his best win and most meaningful win is against Anthony Dirrell. Dirrell looked kind of good in the first couple of rounds, but David Benavidez's style of high volume, fast hands, combination punching, always finding ways to come forward. And he's not just a pure brute. He does have a lot of boxing ability as well. And he, seems to have a great chin to go along with that. So yeah, it ended up being too overwhelming, resulting in a 9th round TKO for David Benavidez over Anthony Dirrell. So that is how Anthony Dirrell lost his WBC belt for the second time. By the way that he won it for the second time was in a vacant title bout against Avni Yildirim for the vacant WBC belt. The belt that David Benavidez vacated for the first time due to, getting caught doing cocaine, basically. So David Benavidez essentially won his WBC title back. So both Anthony Dirrell and David Benavidez are 2-time WBC champions. And then after that knockout loss, Dirrell then fights a split draw against Kyron Davis. That wasn't the best look. Yeah, Kyron Davis is a pretty solid, prospect, up-and-comer type of fighter. By the way, I don't know if you saw the fight between David Benavidez and Kyron Davis more recently, but Kyron Davis didn't make it the full distance, and he took a beating. He tried to hang in there, but the fight eventually got stopped against David Benavidez. But yeah, that same Kyron Davis fought to a split draw with Anthony Dirrell. And then Dirrell returns to the ring on the Canelo versus Caleb Plant undercard and knocks out Marcos Hernandez with a vicious shot. It was one of the knockouts of the year. Kind of unexpected, but it really kind of reinvigorated Anthony Dirrell's reputation of being it's not that he beat an elite fighter, but just the way that he knocked Marcos Hernandez out. It was too dramatic to ignore. So that was exactly what Anthony Dirrell needed to try to secure another big fight. And at the time, Anthony Dirrell was saying, hey, it's either Canelo or bust. This is, again, after Canelo stopped Caleb Plant. Dirrell's like, if Canelo fights me, I'm not going to retire. If I can't get the Canelo fight, I think I'm done. I've done this for long enough. And so going into this Caleb Plant versus Anthony Dirrell fight, I'm kind of thinking, if you are already 1 foot in and 1 foot out of the game, are you essentially kind of semi-retired to where I can't reliably expect you to be at your absolute best in terms of preparation, just, in terms of how much of an appetite you have for the sport, training-wise and so forth. Anthony Dirrell, by the way, is one of these guys who loves to spar a lot. Some guys like to, do a lot of running and different types of workouts and spar very selectively. Not Anthony the Dog Dirrell. He likes to spar, period. But I wonder if he is still all in, given that he was kind of on the fence about retirement. And he didn't get that Canelo fight. And here he is, he's getting a high-profile fight nonetheless against Caleb Plant. So, I look at these guys as being, they're both sweet science style fighters. Caleb Plant, his nickname is Sweet Hands. He's one of these guys who's able to box from range very, very well. Very high boxing IQ. And he's just looked tremendous, to be honest, in just about all of his fights, except for maybe his last two. The one against Caleb Truax, he won pretty easily, but it didn't look, super convincing. I don't think people walked away from that fight saying, yeah, Caleb Plant's about to beat Canelo. And then Caleb Plant fought valiantly to a stoppage loss at the hands of Canelo. So, I guess he looked pretty damn good in that fight as well. But he is one of these sweet science guys who is very good at hitting and not getting hit. Anthony Dirrell, on the other hand, he is a pretty sneakily good defensive fighter, but he doesn't use his feet in the same way that Caleb Plant does. Caleb Plant is, I believe, more of a mover than Anthony Dirrell, especially in this later stage in Anthony Dirrell's career. He is now 37 years old. Not super old, but far from a spring chicken, right? So if you look at Dirrell's fight against Avni Yildirim, you would think that Anthony Dirrell should have won that fight pretty handily. And yes, he did win a decision, but it was razor close. And if you're watching the fight, it looked like one of those fights that could have gone either way. So he fought evenly with Avni Yildirim, fought evenly with Kyron Davis. And it's just one of those things where, does Anthony Dirrell kind of fight to the level of his opponent and make fights that don't need to be super close? And it just makes me wonder, in a fight that I believe, the scorecards are going to matter. I think that this Plant versus Dirrell fight will probably go the distance. Both of these guys have good chins. Both of these guys are pretty durable. And yes, Anthony Dirrell has scored some pretty, good knockouts, like when he knocked Caleb Truax out, or Anthony Hanshaw, or most recently against Marcos Hernandez. He does have a lot of good knockout wins, but he's in a lot of those tough fights where it just seems like he's using a lot of his craft, basically. He spends sometimes a lot of times on the ropes, which a lot of aging fighters do. It preserves their legs. It's a lot easier to kind of hang out on the ropes, like, even the aging Floyd Mayweather was known to do in the later stages of his career. It's just a lot easier to do that than to be able to keep the fight near or in the middle of the ring. I think Caleb Plant still has fresher legs than Anthony Dirrell. It's kind of hard to say who's got the quicker hands. I would err on the side of Caleb Plant, maybe slight hand speed advantage for Caleb Plant. But, there's something about Caleb Plant, and online boxing analyst Richard Dwyer points to this a lot. He is suspicious that Caleb Plant has been quietly working through a hand injury. And, Caleb Plant either tweeted or said something not too long ago where he was going to reveal basically what has been a career hang-up for him that he hasn't really discussed. And I wonder if, assuming he's 100% right physically now, I wonder if he's going to soon reveal that he has been quietly working through some sort of a hand or arm or shoulder, some sort of an injury over the past couple of years that has prevented him from being able to let his right hand go. Because he seems like he's been so left hand dominant in recent fights where he's got a very nice jab. Again, he's a really good mover. He's got great timing, good head movement, just good upper body movement. He's a very slick and smart fighter. But in terms of the punches that he's deploying, it does seem super left-hand heavy. And it's one thing if you're left-hand heavy against Canelo. Maybe you're scared to throw the right hand in fear of Canelo countering, like Canelo countered like when they had the face-off and he hit Caleb Plant, causing a cut before the fight, right? So maybe he was wary and didn't want to let the right hand go. It's one thing if you're fighting Canelo, but when you see the way that Caleb Plant fought Caleb Truax, it just seemed like there were tons of opportunities for Caleb Plant to let that right hand fly, and he simply didn't. Well, not with any regularity at least. So I wonder if this is something that he's still working through, or if he is 100% better. And again, this is assuming or just kind of guessing that he has an injury to begin with. But I think that this is going to be a razor close fight. I think it's going to go to the scorecards, and I think whoever wins this fight is going to win something like 7 rounds to 5, 8 rounds to 4, maybe even like a disputed split decision win. Either way. But I'm going to err on the side of Caleb Plant pulling off a close decision over Anthony Dirrell. Something about 37 years old. You know what I mean? Like in a fight where it's going to matter in round 8, round 9. And I just think that Caleb Plant might still be the fresher guy when it comes to those championship rounds. Because this is going to be a 12-rounder. This isn't a 10-rounder, even though there's not a belt on the line. And I think that it's going to be one of those where the scorecards are going to be all over the place. I expect this to be one of those types of fights. I think Caleb Plant will have a snappier jab than Anthony Dirrell, but I think Anthony Dirrell is going to find more opportunities to try to make the fight a trench style fight where they're a little bit closer position-wise, bodily-wise, to where Anthony Dirrell could try to sneak in some nice uppercuts, could try to make this a little bit more grueling looking. But I think that there are going to be slightly more moments where Caleb Plant is able to keep this fight at range, and I think that he will just have the slightly busier hands, at least with his lead hand. We'll see if Anthony Dirrell is going to be able to land a lot of significant power punches against the pretty elusive Caleb Plant. I think that this is a very interesting, very compelling, sweet science style fight that might devolve into a brawl, but I think that it's gonna mostly be a bit of a chess match, and I think that there might be more moments than not where Caleb Plant has a slight edge in that chess match at this point of Anthony Dirrell's career. If we were talking, 3-4 years ago, maybe it's a different story. And it's not like Anthony Dirrell has shown a bunch of degradation in the ring. It's not like he looks like a shot fighter or can't absorb punishment well, even though I do wonder how soon or early in the fight he's going to have a cut over his eye. I do worry about that a little bit. But I just see him fighting too many close fights against opponents that shouldn't be hanging with him to that degree. But I do have to say that the betting odds in this Plant versus Dirrell fight are just disrespectful. Most of the books have Caleb Plant like at a minus 1,200, minus 900. They basically have him anywhere from a 9-1 favorite to a 12-1 favorite, which is just ridiculous. Now, if this fight ends up being like lopsided and Caleb Plant cruises to like a 9-3 type of win, then maybe it's one of those, I should have known better, and these odds makers had it right. And I am pretty baffled that the odds are this lopsided. I don't see any evidence that really supports that should be the case. Especially when you look, again, at the level of fighter that Caleb Plant has beaten. His best win is arguably still against Uzcategui. But yeah, I don't see Anthony Dirrell being they have him like a 6-1 or 7-1 underdog against Caleb Plant. I think that this should be way more if Caleb Plant's going to be a favorite, which, okay, I get it if he is. He's younger. He was undefeated up until that stoppage loss against Canelo, even though, this is Plant's first fight back. And damn, his first fight back is going to be against Anthony Dirrell. That's not an easy assignment coming off of a stoppage loss for Caleb Plant, right? But I guess I could understand him being the favorite, but if he is the favorite, I see it as maybe a minus 175 or minus 250 at the highest, 2.5 to 1, 2.5 to 1 favorite. No higher than that. Given these guys' track records in the ring. But yeah, I'm going to go with a super close, maybe even controversial, disputed one that just kind of, has one of those just differing opinions on how that fight should have been scored. I think that, the boxing scene unofficial scorecard is going to be different than the PBC broadcast unofficial scorecard. That's going to be different than the, Brian Campbell, if he's doing it on CBS Sports unofficial scorecard. I think that it's going to be all over the place. And, maybe it's going to be all over the place, but it might even be the style of fight, given that sometimes these guys could be in, kind of looking fights to the casual fan. It's not always fireworks when these guys fight. Sometimes it is, but I can see, given that they are both very technical, and look, I can see Dirrell wanting to make it a fight before I see Caleb Plant wanting to make it a fight. But this could end up being more of a chess match than a fight. But yeah, either way, I'm going to go with Caleb Plant edging a split decision win. But yeah, let me know what you think of Caleb Plant versus Anthony Dirrell. Again, I think that this is a very good undercard fight. And I wouldn't be totally surprised if Anthony Dirrell, to the viewing audience's eyes, looks like he edged a decision win over Caleb Plant. But I'm going to go with Caleb Plant earning the official win according to the official judges. But please let me know your thoughts in the comments. And by the way, if Caleb Plant does pull this off against Anthony Dirrell, do you think he eventually fights David Benavidez so they could kind of settle that score at 168? Because I get it, David Benavidez doesn't have a belt, but it does feel like he's an uncrowned champion. Not only is he a two-time WBC champion, but he's still undefeated. He never lost the title in the ring. But let me know what you think Caleb Plant's next moves might be. I haven't been inspired by his opponent's selections. Even though he did win the Canelo sweepstakes, just fight over fight, I think that he could have done a lot more to secure, meaningful fights against elite fighters. But please let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.